Hi, Lisa Workman here, clinical exercise physiologist, here to bring you another video all about real moves for real life. And today I'd like to share with you one of what I would say probably my favorite joint. Yes, I have a favorite joint, and that joint is the hip joint. The hip joint is one of the joints that makes us unique as human beings. It allows us to stand upright and walk on 2 feet. Not very many other mammals can do it, and so the hip joint allows us to do that. So let me get my sidekick here, Harrison, up to show you. As you can see here, here he is in full form. We've got our hip joint right here. And the hip joint is made out of 2 different components. It's made up of the long bone called the femur, as well as part of the pelvis. So when we say the hip, we're actually meaning 2 of the joints, or excuse me, 2 of the bones coming together to form 1 joint. And this joint is actually considered a ball and socket joint. So what that means is that the top of the femur, if you can see here, let's take it a little bit closer, and a little bit back. This ball on top acts like a surface that can move in many, many different ways, almost like kind of like a joystick. So as that head of the femur sits into the pelvis, into what's called a fossa, it is the pocket here that the bone is able to rest in, then that makes it move in all different sorts of directions. So Harrison's really good at showing you kind of the whole picture in the whole body, but I actually have another model that I'd like to share with you. It is my pelvis, and not my pelvis, my pelvis. I have a different pelvis. So this is actually a female pelvis, just so that you're aware. So to get you oriented here, the 2 leg bones have obviously been shortened here, but basically same sort of joint here, ball and socket joint. We allow the ball and socket joint as we move to come forward in flexion, backward extension. We also can rotate the head of this bone by internally rotating as well as externally rotating. And then we can also move this joint out away from our body in abduction and away and towards, I should say, our body in adduction. So there's so many different movement patterns that can happen at this hip joint that I thought it'd be really important to zone in on 2 specific ones today. We'll talk about abduction and adduction. And so I've got the pelvis in an upright position right here, but what we're actually going to do is come to lie on our back. So then we change the orientation just a little bit, but that then allows us to support the pelvis on the floor or on a couch or on a bed, and really let that pelvis be quiet. We're gonna really try and just see if we can move this big leg bone inside this socket. And we'll focus on the movements abduction and adduction. So without further ado, join me on the floor or on your couch or lying down on your bed. Before we get started with some of these hip movements, I want to just highlight a couple things that you might want to grab a hold on in your house. So separated into sort of 2 separate piles. This pile here is some form of tool that can wrap around your legs. So for example, I have sort of a resistance band that can work. It's a little bit stretchy, but that could work in a pinch. Also, a necktie can work. So if you have a necktie that you could wrap around, or if you are someone that has a strap, sort of like a yoga strap, that would be probably the most ideal. But if you don't have it, the other 2 would be fine to substitute. And then in terms of the other equipment that we need something that's sort of firm that we could stick between our thighs. So not very many of you probably have a wooden yoga block, but if you have it, cool. Another sort of support of a yoga block here. But honestly, if you had sort of a beach towel, you could fold it up. And as you fold it up, it becomes more and more firm. So that can work. Also, a firm pillow is probably the easiest thing to use at home too. So if you grab a pillow that's relatively firm, this would probably be the best. So these are sort of the two extra little pieces of equipment that you might have close at hand to go through some of these movements. So I'm going to move them just off to the side before we get into these movements. Now, as I said, you're welcome to do these on the bed or a couch. You don't have to come down onto the floor, but I do want you in a lying position on your back so that then the pelvis is then supported. So for example, here, if we took my pelvis here, now it's laying on the floor and the model is as well. So just coming to a lying position. If your feet could be bent, that would be best, so that they're about hip distance apart, feet flat on the floor. Now, in terms of what's going on in the rest of your body, you want to be relatively comfortable. So if you need something to support your head, then maybe another pillow or a small blanket could help support your head as well. So when you come to this position, this lying position, we want to think about that the leg bone, again, is inside the socket, that fossa in the pelvis. So that's what we're trying to move. So this is a nice place to just kind of place your hands sort of on the lower belly, maybe down. You might feel the front of the pelvis. That might be another place to feel, but of course there is some softer bits there, so you're welcome to just sort of feel out that space, because that is really where the joint is coming from. The other place that you could hold or touch would be the sides of the thighs here, and that again is where that leg bone is going into that hip socket. So this first movement that we'll do is having the feet apart, placing the hands just on that lower belly. We can start bringing our knees away from each other. Here's our hip abduction, and then towards each other, hip adduction. And I'd really like you to keep big toe, little toe, and all the toes in between together on the floor. So the feet don't move. It's simply, again, this leg bone moving in that hip socket. So just play with that for a couple times here. Going to go side to side, and if you want to imagine it being a large book being opened, like one of those large encyclopedias opening and closing, if that's a good visual, or if you want to think of it like a butterfly's wings, that's another way. And so I'm asking you to keep your feet on the floor so they're not flipping, so that we keep that range of motion in a concentrated effort here. So we're not trying to let the legs fall all the way down. So I could flip my feet and let my hips come down. Instead, I want to keep it in this sort of nice controlled range of motion. Good. Now, if you're feeling any sensation under those hands, go ahead and now let's do a little test. We're going to bring the knee up towards the hand. So see, the knee is moving towards the hand. I'm going to press that knee into the hand. Taking your other hand, you might feel a little sensation on the front of the body. We've got our hip flexor muscle starting to work. Let's go to the other side, lifting that knee up into the hand, and just sort of get that sensation. So this actual muscle group likes to help along with hip abduction and adduction. So if you're feeling that sensation, then potentially they're engaging. So now that you know what that feels like, try again and see if you can minimize or soften in that lower belly and not feel any little action under the hands. The movement is coming from that hip, the leg bone in the hip socket, right inside that pelvis. Good. Now we're looking for a range of motion that doesn't cause any odd feelings. So we don't want to have sensation in the back. We don't want to have sensation in the jaw very much. We want to just have the movement be smooth, even if it's smaller. It does not need to be big to move that leg bone in the hip socket. Okay, so now you've got the movement of hip abduction and adduction in a very sort of safe position. We're lying here either on the floor or on a bed or on a couch. So we've kept that pelvis nice and still. let's add a little more. And this is where your fun tools come into play. So first we'll grab onto our strap or our necktie or our TheraBand, and we'll take it around our thighs. So go ahead and move the legs through, and then make sure that they come to a position where they're still hip width apart. But if you need to tighten it to get a little bit more tautness to your strap or tie or TheraBand, go ahead and adjust that now. So what we're adding now is a form of load or added resistance. So we went through the range of motion, no problem. Now we're going to add a little bit of load. So same exact body position. This time though, we have this external tension. So I want you to see now, can you bring your legs apart? Pressing your sides of your thighs into that strap. Good, and just be curious what's going on. We've got an added resistance. And again, you can see that my feet have stayed still. I'm not moving my feet. I'm simply moving my leg bone in my hip socket. Now go ahead and place those hands on the low belly if you'd like. Just double check that those hip flexor muscles on the front of the thigh aren't trying to take over. And there is a certain amount of hip flexion in this position. So yes, of course, there might be a little bit of action in that muscle, but we really want to try not to move with that muscle. That's not his job. Tell him it's not his job. Good. So for example, I just went too far on my left side and I felt mine go off under my left hand. So good cue to feel that. Okay, awesome. So that's hip abduction, legs coming apart. You can go ahead and take that strap off and then see if you can get a hold of your pillow, towel, blanket, whatever we got to stick. Now we're sticking it between the thighs. So the opposite action is adduction. And I always think of it as I'm adding my legs together. So adduction is legs coming together. So from this position now, I'm going to squeeze my legs together against the resistance of that pillow. And then I'm going to slowly relax. Again, my feet are still planted on the floor. My pelvis is quiet. It's simply that leg bone moving in the hip socket. Squeeze and relax and just see what is going on in my body. How does this feel? And could I do this with a little bit more ease? So we're not trying to over contract and just get the hardest contraction possible. We want to see if that muscle is going to move our leg the way it's supposed to. Great. So just release that pillow, take it away for a moment, and then just go through a couple more of those sort of encyclopedia legs or butterfly legs, just to feel now you have those muscles on the inside of the thigh, bringing the legs together. You got muscles on the outside of the hip, bringing the legs apart. And just sort of feeling that sensation. So now I'd encourage you to come up to a standing position once you've done those exercises so that you can feel sort of how those exercises have impacted not only your hips, but maybe in through your back, maybe through your shoulders, maybe you feel a little lightness through the jaw. It is a movement pattern that we don't typically do. We are stuck sort of in this seated position where we have our hip always in a flex position, or we use those hip flexors a lot when we're walking. That is a typical way that we move in our bodies. We don't typically move the legs out to the side and then back together as much. So be curious with your body, explore your body, see how it feels, and then maybe take a chance to go, how did that change how my body feels in space? So I hope you found those simple exercises helpful. They are quite simple, but they can have quite a profound effect on how our body feels. Both hip abduction, when we take the leg away from the body, and hip adduction as we move it towards the midline of the body, are movement patterns that we don't do maybe that often. So I encourage you to try to do these movement patterns as often as you can. This hip socket is a little bit complex, so we'll break it down piece by piece. So stay tuned for more videos highlighting the different aspects and different movement patterns of the hip joint. So with that being said, let's wrap up this video. If you like this video, if you found these exercises helpful and that it made your body feel a little bit better, give me a thumbs up. That'd be much appreciated so that I know you liked the video and that it gave you some benefit. And of course, I am definitely here to help you on your physical activity journey. This is Lisa Workman, clinical exercise physiologist with her pelvis, with her skeleton, always here to help you move better.